The last guests drifted out of the ballroom in slow clusters, their laughter fading into the marble corridors as the crystal chandeliers continued to glow overhead, brilliant and indifferent. Armed men in tailored suits stood at measured distances, their eyes scanning the room with practiced precision. To anyone else, it looked like an extravagant wedding guarded by overzealous security. To the bride, it felt like protection, safety. Proof that she had finally been chosen and claimed in a world where nothing was gentle. She stood in the center of it all, silk and lace wrapped around her like a promise, her bouquet abandoned on a nearby table. Her feet ached from standing, her smile felt frozen in place, but her heart was full in a fragile, hopeful way. She was married now, the wife of a powerful man, a mafia boss feared by many, respected by all, and now, she believed, devoted to her. For months she had been told that loving a man like him meant accepting silence, distance, control. She had accepted all of it because she believed love lived beneath those things. Her husband stood across the room near the bar, the black of his suit perfectly pressed, his presence commanding without effort. Men deferred to him instinctively, stepping aside as he moved, lowering their voices. He should have been radiant tonight, softened by joy, undone by the woman he had just married. Instead, he looked carved from stone. His expression was calm, controlled, unreadable. When their eyes met, he gave her a smile that did not reach his eyes. Something in her chest tightened, a faint warning she did not yet understand. She followed him upstairs to the penthouse suite in silence, the elevator ride long and quiet except for the soft hum of machinery. The doors opened onto glass walls and city lights stretching endlessly into the night. Rose petals were scattered across the floor, champagne chilled on ice, every detail curated for intimacy. This was the moment she had imagined through every doubt and every whispered warning, the moment when the world would finally narrow to just them. She slipped off her heels, letting out a small breath of relief, and turned toward him with a soft laugh. She expected his hands on her waist, his voice low and warm in her ear. Instead, he stood by the window with his back to her, hands clasped behind him like a man preparing for a negotiation. "Can you believe we are married?" she said, trying to keep the tremor out of her voice. Mrs. sounded unreal even to her own ears. He did not turn around. The silence stretched, heavy and unfamiliar, pressing against her ribs until breathing felt difficult. She took a step closer, her smile faltering. "What is it?" she asked quietly. When he finally faced her, the man looking back was not a groom, he was a boss. The warmth was gone, replaced by the same detached expression she had seen him use when ordering men into dangerous situations, the look that never wavered. "We need to talk," he said. Her heart began to race, cold creeping into her fingers. Those words had never brought anything good. "I made a mistake," he continued, his voice steady, almost bored. "We need a divorce." The room tilted, the chandeliers downstairs might as well have shattered. She reached for the back of a chair to keep herself upright, the lace of her gown suddenly too heavy, too real. "What are you saying?" she whispered. "We were just married, hours ago." He did not move toward her, he did not reach out. Instead, he opened a folder resting neatly on the desk, papers already signed, already prepared. "This marriage should never have happened," he said. "I thought I could make it work. I thought I could do what was expected of me, but I love someone else." The words landed with brutal clarity. Love someone else. Her mind went blank, emotions freezing in place as if her body had shut down to survive the impact. She could hear the city outside, distant traffic, the faint hum of life continuing without her. She could see her reflection in the glass, a bride standing alone in a room designed for two. Everything about this night suddenly made sense. The distance, the silence, the way his vows had sounded rehearsed rather than felt. This had never been about love. It had been about convenience, strategy, image. She did not cry, she could not move. Shock wrapped around her like armor, holding her upright as the truth settled deep in her bones. The marriage had ended before it had ever truly begun. The room felt smaller now, even though nothing had changed. The glass walls still showed the city stretching endlessly below. The lights still glittered like promises that meant nothing anymore. Armed guards still waited beyond the doors, but the air had shifted, turned heavy, sharp, dangerous. She stood in her wedding dress, feeling exposed, as if the silk and lace had become a costume. She was no longer allowed to wear. Her husband moved with controlled purpose, placing distance between them the way he did when issuing orders. That could not be questioned. His calm was unsettling, more frightening than anger would have been. He told her the name slowly, deliberately, as if it were a truth that deserved space to breathe. A woman from his past, a connection tied to blood alliances and old loyalties. A woman the underworld whispered about with equal parts admiration and fear. This was not just another lover, this was history. This was power. He explained that the marriage had been planned to stabilize territory, to silence rivals, to present an image of unity, while negotiations played out in the shadows. He said it as if strategy could soften betrayal, as if logic could erase what he had done. She tried to speak, but no sound came. Her mind reached for memories, the way his hand had rested on her back during the ceremony, the weight of his ring sliding onto her finger. The vows spoken before witnesses who believed them real. All of it now felt like theater, a performance staged for an audience that would never know the truth. Her chest tightened as realization crept in that she had not been chosen. She had been placed, positioned like a piece on a board, moved without consent. He said the other woman had returned weeks before the wedding, that old feelings resurfaced, that he had always loved her. He claimed honesty now, as if revealing the truth after the damage was done could be called integrity. He told her the divorce would be clean, fast, discreet, that she would be compensated, protected, relocated if necessary. The words compensation and protection echoed in her ears, cold and transactional, stripping the last traces of intimacy from the night. Outside the door, she became aware of the guards again, the subtle shift of weight, the murmur of voices, low and alert. They were not there for her safety. She understood that now they were there to enforce his decision, to make sure nothing disrupted the order. He was restoring. The realization sent a chill through her body. She was no longer his wife, she was a problem being resolved. Something inside her hardened, not anger, not yet, but a quiet instinct to survive. She lifted her chin, meeting his gaze for the first time since the words had fallen between them, searching for remorse, hesitation, anything human. She found none, only relief, as if ending this had freed him from a burden he had carried too long that hurt more than the confession itself. He told her she would leave before morning, that it was safer that way. He said safety, the same word she had clung to when she said yes to him months ago. The irony burned. Her life with him had ended in less than a day, but the consequences would stretch far beyond this room, beyond this city. She knew enough to understand that discarded wives did not simply fade away, they became rumors, leverage, risks. When he turned away, signaling the conversation was over, she finally found her voice. It came out steady, surprising even her. I trusted you. The words did not accuse, they stated a fact. He paused only briefly before replying that trust was a luxury their world could not afford. Then he left her standing alone in the penthouse suite, the door closing with a soft final sound that echoed louder than any gunshot. She stood there for a long moment, unmoving, the weight of her dress pulling at her shoulders, her ring heavy on her hand. Outside, the city kept breathing, indifferent to the collapse happening high above it. She did not scream, she did not beg, she did not fall. Instead, she reached up slowly and removed the ring, placing it on the glass table where it caught the light and sparkled, useless and perfect. That was the moment the truth settled fully and painfully clear. This marriage had never been about love, it had been about control, appearances, and fear, and now she was on her own in a world that did not forgive weakness. She left before dawn, when the city was still holding its breath, and the sky hovered between night and morning like it could not decide which side to choose. A black car waited downstairs, its engine running, its windows dark. The guards did not look at her when she passed them, they did not offer help or sympathy, they treated her like something already erased. She carried only a small bag, not because she lacked possessions, but because everything else belonged to a life that had ended the moment he turned his back. The car drove without destination, at first weaving through streets, she barely recognized until the skyline thinned and the buildings lowered. She watched familiar landmarks disappear, feeling as if parts of herself were being stripped away with them. When the car finally stopped, she was handed keys and a brief instruction: "This place is off record, no visitors, no questions." Then the driver left her standing alone in front of a narrow building that blended perfectly into its surroundings, forgettable, invisible, safe. Only because no one noticed it. The apartment was small but clean: a single window, a narrow kitchen, a bedroom that smelled faintly of dust and old paint. It felt nothing like the penthouse with its glass walls and watchful height. But that was the point. This was a place meant for hiding, not living. She locked the door, leaned against it, and finally allowed herself to breathe. The silence pressed in, heavy and unfamiliar, yet there was relief tangled inside it, because for the first time since the wedding night, no one was watching her. Hours passed without meaning. She sat on the edge of the bed, still wearing yesterday's clothes, her wedding dress, folded carelessly in the corner like a relic from another life. Her phone buzzed once with a message from an unknown number, advising her to remain indoors until further notice. No signature, no explanation. She deleted it immediately. But the warning stayed with her like a shadow. She understood the rules of this world well enough to know that silence was not safety. It was simply a pause before something else arrived. By the second night, she realized what he had truly done. He had not only divorced her, he had removed her from protection in their world. Wives were shield symbols, untouchable. Once discarded, they became liabilities. Stories circulated quietly about women who vanished after being cast aside, about accidents that were never investigated, about lives erased to send messages. She had believed marriage would keep her safe. Now she saw how fragile that belief had been. Fear came in waves, sometimes sharp, sometimes dull, but beneath it something else began to grow: awareness. She paid attention to sounds outside: footsteps, voices, engines. She memorized escape routes, counted seconds between streetlights, watched reflections instead of faces. She stopped crying, not because the pain was gone, but because tears wasted energy, and energy was survival. She ate sparingly, slept lightly, and thought constantly. On the third morning, she stepped outside for the first time, keeping her head down, blending into the flow of strangers who had no idea who she was or what she had lost. The anonymity was terrifying and liberating all at once. No one bowed, no one watched, no one knew her name. She was just another woman moving through the city unnoticed. And for the first time since meeting him, that anonymity felt like armor. As she walked, she realized something that made her stop mid-step. He had assumed she would break. He had calculated her exit like a transaction, believing fear would keep her silent, believing distance would make her disappear. He had never considered that exile could sharpen instead of destroy, that being stripped of power could teach a person how to see clearly. That night she sat by the window, listening to the city, and understood the truth she had been avoiding. The danger was real. But so was opportunity. If she stayed small, if she remained hidden, forever she would be at the mercy of decisions made by men who had already proven they did not value her life. She did not know yet how, but she knew one thing with absolute certainty: she would not vanish quietly. Somewhere in the city, power was shifting, alliances breaking, forming again in the dark, and without realizing it, yet she was already part of that movement, not as a wife, not as a discarded piece, but as something far more dangerous: a woman who had survived being thrown away and learned how to watch, how to wait, how to endure. She did not plan the encounter, and that was what made it dangerous and unforgettable. It happened on a gray afternoon, when the city felt muted and ordinary, when nothing warned her that the direction of her life was about to shift. She had forced herself to leave the apartment because hiding too long made fear grow teeth. She chose a public place, a charity office operating out of a renovated warehouse, one of the syndicate-funded fronts that pretended to care about rebuilding neighborhoods. She told herself she was only there to apply for temporary work, something quiet, something invisible, something that would keep her moving without being seen. Inside the building, the air smelled of old paper and fresh coffee. Volunteers moved with distracted purpose, unaware of the currents beneath their feet. She waited in a small room surrounded by posters about community outreach and education. Trying to steady her breathing, the woman at the desk asked her to wait for someone who would speak with her directly. No name was given, no explanation offered. That should have been her first warning. When the door opened, she felt it before she saw him, a shift in pressure, a subtle awareness that made her spine straighten. He did not rush, he did not announce himself. He stepped into the room like someone who belonged anywhere without needing permission, tall, composed, dressed simply in dark clothes that did not draw attention, but somehow commanded it. His eyes met hers not with curiosity or recognition, but with assessment, calm, deliberate, thorough. He asked her name, and she gave it without hesitation, waiting for the moment when understanding would flicker across his face, when he would realize who she was, who she had been, married to, what that meant. None of that happened. He listened, as if her name carried no weight beyond the sound of it, and that unsettled her more than recognition ever could. He asked about her experience, and she answered honestly about logistics, planning, public messaging, negotiation with vendors, crisis management. She spoke carefully at first, then with more confidence, as he continued to listen without interrupting, without judging, without dismissing. When she finished, he leaned back, slightly studying her, as if recalibrating something internal. "You know how these organizations really work," he said quietly, "not the public story, the private machinery, the way money moves, the way silence is enforced, the way people disappear from balance sheets and memory." He was not accusing, he was not threatening, he was simply stating facts. She held his gaze, refusing to flinch, and said that survival teaches you how to see systems clearly, especially when you are trapped inside one. His mouth curved not into a smile, but into something like approval. That was the moment she felt it, the danger, not because he was cruel, but because he was precise. She understood suddenly that this man was not a volunteer, not an administrator, not a middle layer. He was power stripped of decoration. He told her he oversaw restructuring efforts across multiple fronts, and that competence mattered more to him than loyalty, history, or reputation. He said he needed people who could think without sentiment and act without panic, people who understood consequences and did not romanticize violence. When he asked if she could do that, she realized her hands were steady and her fear had gone quiet. Outside the room, she could hear movement, voices, phones, ringing, life continuing, unaware that something rare was happening in a forgotten office. She realized then that she was being seen, not as a wife, not as a liability, not as a mistake, but as a mind, a presence, a force that could be useful and dangerous in the right way. When he stood to leave, he gave her an address and a time, nothing more, no promise, no explanation, just an opportunity that felt heavier than any threat she had faced since the wedding night. After he left, she remained seated, listening to her heartbeat slowly return to normal, understanding with sudden clarity that exile had not ended her story. It had positioned her for this moment, an unexpected encounter with a man who did not know her past and did not need to. He saw only what she was becoming, and that realization sent a quiet, powerful certainty through her chest. Whatever came next would not be about survival alone, it would be about choice and power, and the kind of strength that grows in silence. Power never announces itself. When it shifts, it moves quietly through rooms and phone calls and glances, exchanged in corridors where decisions are made without witnesses. She sensed it before she understood it, the subtle change in how people spoke to her, the way doors that had once been closed now opened without hesitation, the way questions replaced orders when her name was mentioned. Something in the city was rebalancing, and she was standing closer to the center than she had ever intended. The address he gave her led to an office hidden behind a legitimate business, a place designed to look unimportant from the outside. Inside, everything was controlled and deliberate. There were no symbols, no excess, no visible guards, yet she felt watched in the same calm, measured way she had felt the first time she met him. He arrived without ceremony, sitting across from her at a simple table, and began speaking as if they had already agreed to something neither of them had said aloud. He explained that leadership was changing not because of emotion or revenge, but because mistakes had been made that weakened the structure. The marriage, he said without using the word, had been one of those mistakes, alliances built on lies wrought from the inside, and the council had lost trust in men who confused desire with strategy. She listened carefully, understanding now that the decision to discard her had cost far more than her husband realized. He told her the syndicate needed legitimacy more than fear now that pressure was coming from every direction. Rivals were watching, law enforcement was circling, and old methods were no longer enough. What they needed were clean fronts, intelligent messaging, and people who could navigate both worlds without exposing either. He said her name again, this time with intention, and asked if she understood what he was offering. It was not protection, not charity, not redemption. It was responsibility, the kind that could save her or destroy her depending on how she carried it. She thought of the penthouse, the ring, the guards who had looked through her as if she were already gone. She thought of the apartment where she had learned to listen to silence and measure footsteps. She nodded once, knowing there was no turning back. Within days, the shift became visible. Her former husband disappeared from conversations, his name spoken less often, his authority quietly eroded. Meetings happened without him, decisions made elsewhere. He still walked the city, still commanded fear. But it was hollow now, the kind that echoes before it collapses. She watched from a distance, as his power thinned, not with satisfaction, but with clarity, seeing the cost of choices made without respect. Her work began immediately. She reviewed accounts, charities, development projects, construction, permits, all the places where truth bent under pressure. She found weaknesses, inefficiencies, quiet betrayals. No one had bothered to clean up. She spoke when necessary, stayed silent when silence was stronger, and slowly earned something far more valuable than loyalty, trust. People began to look at her differently, not as the discarded wife, not as a risk, but as someone who could read a room before anyone else sensed danger. She felt the weight of it at night when sleep came lightly, but it was different from fear. This was purpose sharpened by awareness. One evening, as she left the office, she saw him across the street, her former husband, standing still watching the building. His expression was unreadable, but something fragile flickered beneath it, realization perhaps. He had been removed not by violence, but by consequence, and she was no longer standing outside the world. He ruled, she was inside, something new, something evolving. She did not approach him, and he did not follow. Her life had moved forward, and his was folding in on itself. The encounter passed without words, yet it marked a line neither of them could cross again. That night she stood by her window, looking out at the city, and understood the truth with startling calm. Exile had not made her weak, it had stripped away illusions, and forced her to grow. Power was not something granted by marriage or fear, it was built quietly through competence, restraint, and choice. And for the first time since the wedding night, she felt not safe but strong, which was far more dangerous. He came back into her orbit without warning, the way storms do. When the air has been too quiet for too long, she felt it. Before she saw him, a pressure in the room, a shift in how people moved and lowered their voices, as if something dangerous had crossed an invisible line. She was reviewing documents late in the evening when the glass outside her office reflected a familiar shape, tall, still commanding, still carrying the weight of a name that once ruled her life. He stood there watching her, not entering, not interrupting, just waiting, as if he no longer knew how to claim space. The sight of him did not break her the way she once feared. It would instead. It sharpened her awareness, made her spine straighten and her breath steady. She finished reading the page in front of her before looking up, meeting his gaze without hesitation that alone seemed to unsettle him. When he finally stepped inside the room, he closed the door behind him with a careful hand. No guards, no entourage, no authority to announce his presence. He looked almost ordinary, like a man stripped of armor, trying to remember who he was without it. He spoke her name softly, and for a moment she wondered if he expected her to respond the way she once had, with emotion, with hope, with pain. She did none of those things. He told her he had heard about her role, the trust she had earned, the influence she carried. He said it like a confession, like an admission. He had not prepared for. The city had been whispering her name in places he no longer controlled, and it terrified him more than enemies ever. Had he asked how she was doing, as if he had not been the one to throw her into silence and danger. She listened without interrupting, allowing the space between them to grow heavy with everything unsaid. He moved closer instinctively, then stopped himself as if remembering he no longer had the right. He told her he had made a mistake, that the woman he claimed to love had never truly understood him, that power had blurred his judgment, that fear had driven him to choose wrong. He said her absence had taught him what he had lost. The words floated in the air hollow, and late she felt a strange calm settle over her, the kind that comes when clarity replaces longing. She realized then that he was not standing there because he loved her, he was standing there because he had lost control of the narrative of his life, and she represented the proof of that loss. He spoke of regret, of wanting to fix things, of starting again, somewhere else, somewhere safer. He reached for her hand, stopping just short, as if afraid of being refused. She stepped back, not in anger, not in fear, but in certainty, and that movement carried more power than any raised voice ever could. She told him quietly that what he felt was not love, but panic. Love did not arrive after consequences. Love did not wait until power slipped away. Love did not discard someone and then ask them to return when the world grew cold. He tried to argue, but the conviction was gone from his voice, replaced by desperation, and that was the moment she truly saw him for who he was. She reminded him that he had chosen fear over trust, control over partnership, silence over honesty. She told him that the woman he left behind no longer existed, that exile had changed her, that survival had taught her something he never learned, which was how to stand without needing to dominate. He listened, but did not understand, not fully, because understanding would require humility, and humility had never been his strength. When she opened the door, signaling the conversation was over, he hesitated, as if hoping for something, anything that might pull her back into his gravity. She gave him nothing, not cruelty, not comfort, only distance and truth. After he left, she remained standing for a long moment, feeling the weight of what had just happened settle into something final. The man who once defined her future now held no power over her choices. The past had returned not to reclaim her, but to confirm how far she had moved beyond it. Outside, the city continued its restless rhythm, alliances forming, breaking, reshaping themselves in the dark. She returned to her work with steady hands, aware that whatever storms lay ahead, she would face them not as someone who had been abandoned, but as someone who had chosen herself, and in that choice she had become untouchable. The truth did not arrive all at once. It crept in slowly through fragments, half-sentences and silences that lingered too long after meetings ended. She began to notice patterns. First, the way certain accounts had been rerouted without documentation, the way old allies of her former husband avoided eye contact when her name surfaced, the way conversations stopped when she entered rooms that once would have ignored her. None of it screamed danger, yet together it formed a shape she could not ignore. She spent nights reviewing records that were never meant to be read together, charity transfers layered over construction permits, shipping routes disguised as supply chains. Everything pointed to decisions made months before the wedding, decisions that had nothing to do with romance or regret, and everything to do with fear. She followed the trail, patiently understanding now that haste was the enemy of survival. The more she uncovered, the clearer the picture became, and the heavier the weight in her chest grew. It was never about loving another woman. That story had been convenient, dramatic, easy to accept, because it fit the cruelty of the moment. The real reason lay deeper, buried beneath pride and calculation. Her former husband had known something was coming, pressure from rivals, fractures within the council, whispers of betrayal that could turn violent. He had seen it forming, and instead of standing beside her, trusting her strength, he had chosen the simplest solution: remove her from the board, remove her from the risk, remove her from his life. The divorce had been an act of self-preservation disguised as honesty. He believed that by casting her out, he was sparing her from becoming leverage, a target, a weakness his enemies could exploit. He believed fear gave him the right to decide her fate without her consent, and in doing so he had revealed the deepest flaw in his rule: not cruelty, not betrayal, but a fundamental lack of respect. The realization settled over her with unexpected calm. It did not soften the hurt, but it sharpened it, gave it edges. She could understand, she saw now, that he had never believed she could survive the truth or the danger. He had loved the version of her that fit within his control, not the woman who could stand beside him when the world turned hostile. When she confronted him again, it was not with accusation, but with clarity. She laid the facts before him, quietly watching his expression shift. As understanding dawned too late, his silence confirmed everything. The look in his eyes was not remorse, but exposure, the fear of being truly seen, stripped of the narrative he had built to protect himself. He tried to explain that he had acted to protect her, that he could not risk her life. She listened, until he finished, then told him the words that ended whatever power he thought remained. "You did not trust me to choose, you decided for me," and called it love that is not protection, that is control. The room felt colder after that truth settled between them. He looked smaller, somehow diminished by the weight of his own decisions. She understood then that his downfall had never been caused by rivals or betrayal. It had been caused by his inability to see strength where it did not look like his own. Walking away from him that night, she felt something close inside her, not anger, not grief, but a door finally sealed. The betrayal was no longer personal, it was structural, a lesson etched into her understanding of power and partnership. She had been excluded not because she was weak, but because she was strong enough to challenge him, and he had been afraid of that. The revelation changed everything. It stripped the past of its illusions and clarified the future ahead. She knew now what kind of alliance she would never accept again, and what kind of man she would never kneel beside. Power without respect was just another form of violence dressed in strategy. As she returned to her work, the city felt different, less threatening, more legible. She moved through it with the confidence of someone who understood the game and refused to be a piece on someone else's board. The truth had cost her a marriage, but it had given her something far more valuable: agency. In the quiet of the night, she allowed herself one final thought, not of what she had lost, but of what she had escaped, and with that understanding firmly in place, she stepped fully into the role she had been moving toward all along, not as a discarded wife, not as a symbol, but as a woman who knew exactly who she was and what she deserved. The shift between them did not announce itself with words or gestures. It grew in the spaces where nothing was demanded, and nothing was rushed. It lived in the quiet moments after meetings when the room emptied and neither of them moved away immediately. It lived in the way he listened when she spoke, not with impatience or authority, but with attention, as if every thought mattered because it came from her. She had known men who mistook intensity for intimacy and control for devotion, but this was different, and that difference unsettled her more than danger ever had. He never touched her without invitation, never stood too close, never used his power to blur the line between protection and possession. Instead, he offered consistency, the rarest currency in their world. He showed up when he said he would, followed through without reminding her, and treated her authority as equal to his own. When decisions were made, her voice carried weight, not because of who she had once married, but because of what she had proven herself to be. She felt herself relax inch by inch in ways she had not realized she had been holding tight. Late nights became common, not for romance, but for work strategy and long conversations over cold coffee and scattered files. They spoke about the city, about how power rotted when it fed only on fear, and how silence could be used to heal as well as destroy. He shared pieces of himself, slowly, stories of how he had learned restraint, the cost of violence, the mistakes that haunted him, because he had not known when to stop. She listened, not as a woman waiting to be impressed, but as someone who understood the weight of those truths. Trust built itself quietly without ceremony. She noticed it in the way she no longer checked exits every time she entered a room when he was there. She noticed it when she slept through the night without listening for footsteps. She noticed it when his presence felt like steadiness instead of threat. That realization frightened her, because trust had once been the door through which her life had collapsed. One evening after a long day, they stood by the window watching the city lights shimmer below them. Neither spoke for a long moment. Then he said that he did not want to be another man who mistook her strength for something to conquer. He said he admired her not for surviving, but for refusing to disappear when it would have been easier. He told her that whatever existed between them would move at her pace or not at all. Something shifted in her chest at that, not the sharp ache of longing, but a slow warmth spreading through guarded places. She realized then that love did not have to arrive like a storm. It could come like this, quietly, steadily, without demanding sacrifice of self. She did not respond with confession or promise. She simply stayed, and in that staying something new took shape. Their connection deepened in glances shared across crowded rooms and in decisions made together without needing to speak. They learned each other's silences and the meanings behind them. He never asked her to choose between who she was and who she might become. He made space for both, and that space felt like freedom. She understood then that what bound them was not need or rescue, but recognition. He saw her clearly not as a wound to heal or a symbol to claim, but as a woman whose presence changed the air in a room. She felt seen without being exposed, protected without being confined. As winter settled over the city and snow softened its edges, she realized she was no longer bracing for loss. The past no longer reached for her in moments of quiet. Instead, there was anticipation, gentle and terrifying, because it was real and unforced. Love built in silence did not shout its arrival, it simply stayed. And for the first time in her life, staying felt like the most powerful choice of all. The warning arrived without sound, the kind that settled into her awareness like a change, in whether she felt it in the way messages slowed, then stopped, in the way familiar routes suddenly felt exposed, in the way eyes lingered too long. When she passed through spaces that once felt neutral, power was moving again, not upward or outward, but inward, folding in on itself like a trap being carefully set. She did not panic. She had learned that panic made noise, and noise attracted attention. The first sign came from a report that did not align with the others, a shipment rerouted without explanation, a delay blamed on weather that never came. She traced it patiently, following threads that led not outward to rivals, but back toward something she recognized too well. The pattern carried his signature, the same calculated risk, the same willingness to sacrifice others to reclaim what he believed was his. She understood then that the past had not finished with her, it had only been waiting. Her former husband had been stripped of authority, but not of ambition. Men like him did not accept removal quietly. They looked for openings, for fractures, for moments when restraint could be mistaken for weakness. He had found one, and he intended to use it. He fed information to a rival family, not enough to expose himself, but enough to ignite conflict. He offered her name as proof of leverage, knowing it would draw attention, knowing it would force a reaction. He was gambling with lives to remind the city that he still mattered. The attack did not come with gunfire or chaos, it came with silent streets emptied too quickly. Meetings were canceled without explanation. Safe houses went dark one by one. The system she had helped stabilize began to tremble. She recognized the strategy, immediately destabilize, then step in as the familiar solution. She had seen it before, only this time she was not the piece being moved, she was the one reading the board. When the warning finally reached her directly, it was delivered by a man she trusted, and even then it was careful. He did not say she was the target. He did not need to. She could see it in his eyes, in the way his voice held urgency without fear. She did not ask to be hidden. She did not ask to leave. Instead, she asked for time and access. And when he hesitated, she reminded him quietly that running would only confirm the narrative being built around her. They worked through the night, mapping alliances, exposing false trails, planting truths where lies had been expected. She used the very invisibility he had once forced on her as a weapon. She moved through channels he did not know she had access to, because he had never bothered to learn her depth. Information shifted direction, loyalties followed. And by the time the rival family realized the bait had turned into a mirror, it was too late. The confrontation came not in violence, but in exposure. His betrayal was laid bare before the council, stripped of justification, stripped of sentiment. He tried to argue that it had been necessary, that power demanded sacrifice, but the room was quiet in the way. It only became when men realized fear no longer held authority. His voice faltered as he understood that she was no longer behind him or beneath him. She was standing apart, and that separation was absolute. When he looked at her, then truly looked at her, he did not see anger or triumph, he saw finality. The realization broke something in him that ambition could not repair. He had lost not because he was outmatched, but because he had underestimated the cost of discarding someone who could think beyond him. After it was over, after his removal became permanent, after his name lost its weight, she stepped outside into the night air, feeling the tension drain slowly from her body. She did not feel victorious. She felt clear the danger had passed, not because she had been saved, but because she had chosen to stand, and that choice had rewritten everything. In the quiet that followed, she understood the truth with stunning simplicity. The final betrayal had not been his, it had been hers against the version of herself that once believed survival meant silence. That woman was gone, replaced by someone who understood that power earned through clarity could not be taken away. and as the city settled back into uneasy balance, she walked forward knowing that whatever came next she would meet it not as a target, but as a force no longer ignored. The city revealed its secrets at dawn when the noise softened and truth rose without resistance. She stood alone on the terrace overlooking streets that had once terrified her, now quiet beneath pale light. The night had ended with his removal, with the final sealing of a name that no longer carried threat, yet she felt no relief, only awareness that something far larger had been unfolding beneath every step she had taken since exile. He joined her without sound, standing beside her, not in front, not behind, matching her stillness. The man who had offered restraint instead of dominance waited, allowing silence to stretch. Until she spoke first, she told him. She finally understood why the council had trusted him with reform, why power bent differently around him. It was not because he was feared, it was because he listened. He nodded and said that listening had taught him something else, something he had never shared. He told her that the files she had accessed, the networks she had navigated, the instincts she carried, were not accidental. He revealed that her family name, though buried, had once been tied to old intelligence roots, forgotten archives, and quiet strategists who shaped outcomes without ever claiming credit. Her exile had not erased that legacy, it had awakened it. The revelation did not shock her, it settled into place like a missing piece sliding home. She saw her life differently now, the ease with which she read systems, the calm she found in chaos, the way survival had sharpened rather than shattered her. She had never been weak, she had been underestimated by men who only recognized power when it shouted. He told her that the council now knew it too, that her actions during the crisis had changed the structure permanently. Fear was no longer the foundation, strategy was, and she had become essential to that future. She asked what that meant, and for the first time she saw uncertainty cross his face, not fear, but respect. He said it meant choice. He said he would not offer protection disguised as possession or partnership demanded through obligation. He said he would ask instead. He turned to face her, fully lowering himself, not in submission, but in clarity, meeting her eye level with honesty. He told her that what they had built in silence deserved truth in the open, that he wanted her beside him, not as a wife bound by fear, but as a partner who chose power with him every day. He told her he would walk away if that was not what she wanted, and mean it. The city held its breath. She felt the weight of every past moment, the wedding night, the exile, the danger, the nights spent listening for footsteps. All of it led here, not to rescue, but to recognition. She realized that love had never been the problem, control had been, and this man offered none. She said yes, not to a ring, not to a title, but to the future they could build without erasing themselves. In that moment, the power between them balanced, naturally equal and unforced. The sun rose higher, painting the city gold. She understood then that the worst night of her life had not destroyed her. It had cleared the path, it had burned away illusions, and left behind truth, strength, and choice. Later, when the council gathered, it was not announced with spectacle. No one bowed, no one cheered. The change was felt, not seen. Her role was acknowledged, her authority unquestioned, not because of marriage, but because of merit. As she walked through the city that evening, hand in hand with the man who had never tried to own her, she knew the final truth. The shocking reveal was never about who he was or what power she held. It was this: she had never been saved, she had always been becoming. And the woman who had been discarded on her wedding night now stood at the center of a world rebuilt on respect, silence, and the unbreakable knowledge of her own worth.